Welcome back, guys. Today I wanted to discuss some of the Beyond Light lore that's come out, just give a brief synopsis of each of the major lore books, the human-centered ones that have come out so far, and explain sort of what's going on. I think there's some really juicy tidbits that have come out since the Clovis Bray journals, some really interesting stuff about the Vex, so I think I'm just going to continue to milk this Clovis Bray stuff as long as possible. Okay, I'm sorry, no more dad jokes, I promise. But a quick announcement, I am currently working on the script for something completely different. I mentioned it about a week ago now, a video essay on the movie from 2000 called Titan AE. It's going to be an examination of the movie itself and why it failed in the box office. So I think it's looking pretty well. The script is looking nice. So yeah, keep your eyes out for that. I'm not sure when it'll be done yet, probably a couple weeks. I'm going to be working on some other videos in the meantime, some more of the lore readings. But yeah, so let's just get right into it. So real quick, I wanted to give a little bit of a synopsis for the people who haven't read through all the Clovis Bray journal stuff. But if you have actually read that stuff, then I'll go ahead and put a time card here so you can just skip through this part. You know Clovis Bray. He's the guy that created the Clovis Bray company. He has granddaughters Elsie Bray and Anna Bray, and also Willa Bray, who we have not met. So Clovis Bray found an artifact on the moon, and this was the darkness artifact that we saw in a previous lore book where the commander of the mission ended up going crazy and her entire team ended up going crazy from visions that they saw, messages they thought they were hearing, etc., etc. Clovis was behind all of this, and that artifact told him to go to Europa to find a second artifact. He calls this clarity control, and he calls the effect that it gives clarity. So the first part of the book is mainly just explaining that the entire goal of this is to fund his exo program because he wants to become immortal. He wants to become this progenitor of all human life, like where people look back in 1,000 or 100,000 years and see him as the reason why they are so advanced. He wants to be that, basically almost a god. And he thinks he can do this by finding out whatever secret the darkness or clarity control has to offer him. So he goes to Europa, and he ends up finding this artifact, and it tells him to build a Vex gate. Now during this time, he's sending off messages to all his grandchildren and asking them to come help him. But the only person that responds is Elsie Bray, and she decides yes, she will come, but she's not happy about it. None of his grandchildren actually like him because he sort of killed his son. His son was sick, and so he tried to put him in an exo body, and things went horribly wrong. And so none of his grandchildren have forgiven him for that. So anyways, so he builds the gateway, and it ends up taking them to this star called 2082 Volantis. It's the star from what they believe is maybe the Vex homeworld, or at least in that system there is a world that the Vex occupy. Pretty soon they find out that they can use the Vex radiolarian fluid on the exos, and it stops some of the issues that they've been having. It also appears to create other issues called the Cotard delusion, but some of the other loop, billboarding, and crash cycles that he mentions are no longer an issue with this. So exo production gets ramped up. However, some of those Cotard delusions are becoming more noticeable, and so things become tense on Europa. He starts to get in arguments with the Dr. M. Sundaresh and with his granddaughter Elsie Bray as well. This whole time he's been having visions that he thinks is from clarity control, but later he ends up finding out that they are coming from the Traveler itself. Finally, it comes out that this Dr. M. Sundaresh is not actually there. She is sort of a Vex infection in Clovis's bone marrow, in fact. In one entry, he wakes up and basically his entire body has been separated, like all his respiratory system, his circulatory system is all separated and then braided together like some sort of crazy human Twizzler. Elsie, who had just turned into an exo, comes in and saves him. And it's not really clear whether or not that part was actually real. It could have been within Clovis's mind because Dr. M. Sundaresh wasn't actually real. She was just in his mind itself. So at the very least, he died, and we find out that Dr. M. Sundaresh was just a Vex infection. So this kind of sets off Elsie, and she begins to obsess over the Vex and trying to get rid of them. Eventually, it leads to her leaving the planet to go visit her sisters, and when she comes back, she decides that she's going to take out the gateway to 2082 Volantis. She gets a sort of light weapon that she made from one of the Traveler's light modes and goes to blow it up. But Clovis and the ship's AI actually end up blowing her up. So as the lore book starts to end, the last things that happen are Clovis sort of going insane, talking to himself as M. Sundaresh sort of starts to take over his human body, and he finally says that he has created a second Elsie. Now, in terms of the game, it's not super clear yet which Elsie this is, whether or not the first Elsie actually survived that blast, or whether it's actually the second Elsie that we're seeing. And the reason why I wouldn't say immediately that it is this second Elsie is because it's explained that whenever he created her, he sort of removed some of those memories that she had and took away the obsession of taking out the Vex, making her just more this doting granddaughter. So it's not clear whether or not that version of Elsie would have turned on him. But finally, the lore book ends whenever he turns himself into a Vex, and he also puts another version of himself into the AI that runs the entire Exo program. And so that's the end of the Clovis Bray journal. But that's not the end of the story of Clovis Bray and Elsie Bray. We get actually a lot more of it in these Beyond Light lore books. So far on the Ishtar Collective website, which kind of catalogs all the Destiny lore books, there are 7 new lore books. Of these, 4 of them deal directly with the Bray family. 2 of them are more for the Fallen, and 1 of them deals with a Bray employee, but it's coming from his son, so I'm going to talk about the 4 that deal directly with the Bray family for now. So first up is the lore book, the Bray Lab Records. This is basically just a record of transcripts from within the actual Bray Labs as they were testing the exos, testing the radiolarian fluid and things like that. It doesn't give us too much lore-wise, except that it shows us even more how much of a monster that Clovis Bray was. See, in the journal itself, this was all from his perspective, and so even though you could see through his words to the monster that he actually was, he always put a spin on things that made himself seem a little bit better. Here, this is an objective view of things that he did and said to other people, and it's pretty monstrous. He forces people to ingest and inject radiolarian fluid, not so dissimilar to a certain person telling people to inject bleach. But yeah, obviously that did not go over well. In both entries, both people that ingested it and injected it died pretty horrific deaths. He then moves on to try and graft exo arms to human body, human flesh, and even insinuates that since one of them failed and died, that the person he's talking to is going to have to cut off his own arm and go in there to further science, I guess. By the way, if you've played through the Beyond Light storyline, at one point you'll go through one of the lost sectors and Ghost will say something about this. I tried looking around, but I wasn't able to find any human bodies grafted with exo arms or vice versa. So if anybody else has it and can point me to it, that'd be great. I'd love to see that. He also sends random people to go get in near proximity to clarity control, and whenever the first group dies but has reported messages, he sends in a second group but tells them, oh, don't get too close to it. There's a lot of fluid spilling in this lore book, a lot of guts and gore. If it were a movie, it would most certainly be rated R. We'll just say that. Now, one interesting bit in here that was also in the Clovis Bray journal is the mention of a tower. This is something that exos apparently see whenever they have visions or dream. They dream of a tower. And I find this fascinating because it's totally vague on what this tower actually is. Whether it's maybe the Tower of the Guardians and they're just sort of seeing into the future, that's probably something, or maybe it's something down in the Deepstone Crypt that we're going to find in the raid. One interesting parallel that I haven't seen mentioned yet is from the book Annihilation. It was actually a movie as well. It came out a couple years ago. But in the book itself, there was a tower that they find in the middle of this jungle that had been taken over by some weird alien phenomena. And the tower itself actually wasn't like a normal tower that you think of. It was a tower inside the ground. So instead of going up, it went down. But for some reason, everybody in the group individually all refers to it as a tower, even though it would probably be better described as a pit or something similar. So it makes me wonder if this tower does exist inside the Deepstone Crypt. Is that some sort of homage or a wink towards the Annihilation book? So yeah, that's basically that lore book. It just shows how much of a monster Clovis is. He sacrifices everybody around him to gain the smallest bit of progress. He has zero empathy for anybody, and everything he does is based on fear. Funnily enough, in his journal, he criticizes the Judeo-Christian God for not forcing Abraham to kill his son Isaac. He says that he should have made Abraham go through with it, because by not doing so, you basically come off as weak. He should have killed him, because then Abraham would know that he should not expect anything from God. He should obey him no matter what. And yet, in the very same sentence, he then goes on to say that people shouldn't try to know God's intentions. So clearly he exempts himself from people, and obviously he considers himself a god, which I guess wasn't anything new. So the next lore book chronologically is Legacy's Lament. And this is sort of right after the Clovis Bray journals happen, and the Vex are starting to take over Europa. It appears that the Clovis Bray Company were not able to control that portal to 2082 Volantis. There had been sort of digital infections that had been coming through, and apparently now actual Vex are coming through. Side note, this portal itself is actually what you see at the end of the Glassway strike, where the Hydra comes out of is the portal to 2082 Volantis. So this lore book follows Elsie as she tries to start up an exo resistance against these Vex incursions. And at the beginning, it shows her awakening an exo. It's later revealed that this exo is the one that Clovis Bray created for himself. But he didn't give himself any of his memories, only just the basic emotions and innate intelligence that Clovis Bray has. So this exo acts nothing like him. Apparently, these normal exos are having a hard time keeping Europa from being overrun, and the Clovis Bray AI, the one that controls the exo production that Clovis put his mind into, is not really helping them. He doesn't want to stop the Vex coming through, because then that would stop his production. So basically it does everything it can to prevent them from closing down the portal and even from leaving. It kills a bunch of them in the process. So this exo version of Clovis, we'll call him Clovis 1, decides that he doesn't really like this AI, and he sides himself with Elsie. And there's this long epic battle where Clovis 1 dies and then gets reborn into the next exo over and over and over and over again until he gets to Clovis 43. And they were finally at least partially successful in repelling the Vex by accepting some help from the Clovis AI, a sort of deal with the devil. But after doing that, Clovis 43 and Elsie end up going and shutting down that AI. And Clovis 43 finds out about his history, finds out about what the real Clovis Bray did, and is so ashamed of all that he wants to have his memory wiped again. And he asks Elsie to call him by the nickname that he gained in the battles, which was Banshee. So Clovis 43 got his memory wiped and became Banshee 44. This is super interesting because that's the gunsmith, guys. Our gunsmith the entire time has been Clovis Bray, but a good version of Clovis Bray. One other interesting little tidbit from this lore book was the description of this Clovis AI. It was actually described by one of the other exos as a giant exo, which is sort of interesting because this is all happening down in the Deepstone Crypt, and a giant exo existing down there might tell us something about who the boss there could be. Maybe he wasn't fully shut down, or maybe at some point somebody else came and brought him back up. I don't know, but maybe look out for that when the raid comes out. And so finally, the last lore book is called The Dark Future. And this sort of looks at an alternate timeline to our own and follows Elsie through it. This one is super fascinating. If you ever read Marvel Comics or something like that, you'll know it as sort of like the what-if stories that you'd see there. So it starts off with Anna coming to Elsie Bray, asking her for help. Basically, Anna's ghost has died. Apparently, this has happened to a lot of Guardians. Savathun has invaded as well, and Anna wants help from Elsie getting stasis powers to stop Savathun. At first, Elsie does not want to help her, but then she relents, and they decide to go to the Deepstone Crypt, because Anna still has the Rasputin war mind, or at least what's left of it, inside basically a hard drive. So they want to upload it into an exobody. So kudos to everybody who predicted that. So they do that, and they bring Rasputin alive, and while they're there, they run into Zavala. He's missing a leg, he's no longer has his light, and we find out a little bit more. We find out that Eris actually sided with the darkness, sided with Savathun, and we find out that there have been a lot of Dark Guardians. So apparently, this all started back whenever the Vanguard started sending missions in to the Black Garden. Zavala hints at the fact that Guardians then were corrupted by the Dark Heart in the Black Garden, which indicates that our Guardian was not there because obviously our Guardian destroyed the Black Heart. From there, it seems like a lot of the main story points happen the same way, except at the same time, Guardians were starting to go over towards the darkness. And so whenever Aramis invades, these Dark Guardians get stasis powers and they go crazy. Eventually Savathun came, and then Eris and a bunch of her Dark Guardians sided with her, which prompted the Traveler to leave because all these Guardians that he's chosen have gone over to the other side, and so it basically wants nothing to do with humanity anymore, and so no Guardians have light powers. So Anna, Rasputin, Elsie, and Zavala decide to hatch a plan to go get the Traveler back. And to do so, they find Marasov, who has this coalition of Cabal and Fallen, and she has apparently commandeered the Leviathan ship. So they take the Leviathan ship, recreating some of Gaul's plans to capture the Traveler. During this time, Anna is being kind of strange, asking Elsie over and over again to teach her stasis powers. And Elsie overhears Zavala talking to Marasov about this, saying that he'll put her down if he needs to, because she is apparently being tempted too much by the darkness. So they go and capture the Traveler and make an assault on the Scarlet Keep on the moon, which is apparently the stronghold of Savathun and Eris. So the battle begins, and Rasputin comes in with some orbital fire, taking out some of Eris's forces, some of the corrupted Awoken. Zavala gets himself overcharged with the Traveler's light and apparently kills Savathun. It's not super clear, but of course Anna betrays Elsie, kills Marasov right in front of her, and then they get into a fight. Elsie ends up having to put her down, but not before Eris kills her. And so it looks like this whole resistance is basically dead in the water because the leader Marasov and Elsie are both dead. It's not clear what happened to Zavala, and Eris is still alive, maybe Savathun. But wait, because then we see Elsie waking up in a sort of Groundhog Day situation, seeing Cade 6 talking about taking out Taniks. So apparently she is in a time loop that stretches all the way back before our Guardian came, whenever Cade 6 first got initiated into the Vanguard, because if you remember, it was a bet that he had with Andal Brask about taking out Taniks. Basically, he killed Taniks, who had killed the previous Hunter Vanguard, Andal Brask, and so he gained the Hunter Vanguard. And Elsie says something to the effect of, this has happened to her multiple times. She has apparently lived through this loop multiple times and tried different things to change it, but nothing has worked so far. But again, it appears the clear difference between her timeline, her loop, and our timeline, the one that we have witnessed, is our Guardian. Because again, Guardians started being corrupted by this dark heart in the Black Garden, whereas in our timeline, we go in alone and destroy it. So yeah, that's basically the current lore books as they stand right now. But I'll be doing the full readings coming soon, and again, I'll have some other videos coming out as well. Again, if you haven't followed me yet, follow me on Twitter at Meromorphic8. I'd like to get a Discord going for this channel, but as familiar as I am with using it, I don't really know a lot about creating or managing a channel. So if any of you guys want to help me out with that, let me know, and we can create a Discord where we can talk about the Destiny lore and, you know, whatever else. But yeah, until next time, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
No, I want Meramorphic's beehole to pop up in your videos.